Morning light slid across the glass canyons of downtown, turning the tech district into a grid of blue steel and bright promise. Marcus Taylor stepped out of a rideshare in front of Scalar Labs, a fast-growing software company whose logo, three nested triangles, glowed from a 40-story facade. He checked the time. 8:42 a.m. The interview was at 9, early enough to breathe, to center, to arrive on his own terms. He wore a charcoal suit with a subtle herringbone pattern, a white shirt crisp at the collar, and a deep blue tie he saved for big rooms. His leather portfolio rested under his arm, the edges of printed case notes tucked neatly inside. He'd prepared thoroughly. He'd read every public product roadmap, rewatched the CEO's keynote, sketched three strategic scenarios for their enterprise pivot, and annotated their last two press releases with margin notes in a tidy, slanted hand. Inside the lobby, the air changed, cool, filtered, faintly citrus. A wall-sized LED display rolled through brand imagery, smiling teams, lines of code, product mock-ups, then flashed the company slogan, "Build what matters." A security guard with a friendly face and a cup of coffee nodded as Marcus approached. "Interview?" the guard asked. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "Marcus Taylor, 9 o'clock with talent." "Elevator bank B," the guard said, sliding a visitor badge across the counter. "Good luck." "Appreciate it." In the elevator, Marcus stood alone, watching the floor numbers climb with soft, efficient pings. He let his shoulders drop a fraction and inhaled the quiet. He had done harder things than this, led gnarly product turnarounds, mediated between feuding departments, shipped features under impossible timelines. Still, interviews were their own theater, and this company was one of the few he could imagine joining. Not for prestige, he'd had that, but for the puzzle their business posed. Could they make the leap from a beloved developer tool to a platform that Fortune 500s would stake milestones on? The doors opened onto the 23rd floor, and a wave of startup aesthetics spilled out. Polished concrete, exposed ductwork, glass-walled conference rooms with names like Newton, Ada, Curie. In one corner, an espresso machine hissed like a small dragon. In another, a soft seating area framed a wall of plants so perfect it looked artificial. At the reception desk, a young man in a cream sweater smiled brightly. "Welcome to Scalar Labs," he chimed. "Name?" "Marcus Taylor, 9 a.m. with talent." He typed quickly, then handed Marcus a smaller badge with a lime green lanyard. "Someone from talent will be right out. You can have a seat." He gestured toward a low sofa near a picture window. Beyond the glass, the city stretched in ordered blocks, the river like a strip of hammered metal. Marcus sat, placed his portfolio beside him, and scanned the space. Two engineers in hoodies debated a diagram on a whiteboard with happy ferocity. A designer padded past in socks, carrying three laptops balanced like trays. On a side table, a book about scaling organizations sat open to a chapter on systems, not heroes. He smiled faintly. Good principle. He believed in it. He had also learned that systems, if designed poorly, could camouflage bias, the kind that hummed in the background until it shaped who got to belong. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. On the first page, he'd written a handful of reminders in ink. Listen for what they value when no one is looking. Ask about the work between the milestones. Don't oversell. Tell the truth. Be yourself. You've earned that. "Mr. Taylor?" He looked up. A woman in her 30s stood with a tablet tucked to her chest. Ellen Harper wore a slate blouse, black trousers, and an expression of glossy, professional efficiency. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a low knot. A thin gold chain caught the light at her collarbone. "Yes," Marcus said, rising. He offered his hand. "Marcus, nice to meet you." She hesitated half a beat, just long enough to register, and then shook his hand, brief and cool. "Ellen, talent acquisition. We'll start with a quick screen in Newton." She pivoted, and he fell into step beside her. As they walked, Marcus noticed the way her eyes skated over him, tie, watch, shoes, as if scanning for something that might explain him to her. Candidates sometimes did that to themselves in the mirror. Gatekeepers did it to others. They passed a wall of framed patents and a mural painted with bold block letters, "Invent Together." Ellen tapped the conference room panel, and the glass unlocked with a soft click. "Water? Coffee?" she asked mechanically. "I'm good, thanks." He took a seat across from her at a pale wood table. The room was all clean lines and quiet acoustics. A digital clock glowed 8:53 in the corner. Ellen opened her tablet. The rectangle of light illuminated her face. Her eyes never quite settled. "So, Marcus," she began, crisp, practiced. "Walk me through your background." "High level." He nodded. "Computer science undergrad, product roles across developer tools and enterprise integrations. Led a platform migration last year for a client serving 12 million MAUs. Built a cross-functional council to unblock data contracts between analytics and platform teams." She held up a hand, a smile that wasn't one. "We move really fast here. Culture's a big deal for us." A familiar script. He'd hear the meaning inside the phrasing, but he'd let the conversation shape it. "I value pace," he said evenly, "and clarity. Pace, without it, breaks teams." She flicked to another screen. "Where do you see yourself fitting in?" "We have a way of doing things, a certain vibe." He set his palms on the table, open. "I'm less interested in fitting than in adding. If the company wants to become a reliable enterprise platform, I can help map the path, process, people, product. I've done that journey." Her gaze dipped to his resume, really looked at it for the first time. He watched the micro movements, the pause at a well-known firm, the skim past a national award, the skip over a publication he knew carried weight. She pursed her lips, then tapped her tablet, as if to shoo the data along. She began, and then caught herself. "We'll get into details in a minute. First, a couple of calibration questions." He had been in countless rooms like this, in countless cities, with countless people who believed themselves to be neutral arbiters of talent. Some were, some weren't. He had learned to feel the room the way an engineer reads a log, tone as telemetry, facial shifts as events. Ellen laced her fingers. Scalar's culture is youthful, high energy. Work hard, play. We're looking for people who can hang with that. Hackathons, late pushes, you know? She glanced up, searching his face for something she had already decided to confirm or deny. "I've shipped through nights," Marcus said. "I've also built schedules that make nights the exception. Sustainability wins long games." She made a small, polite sound. "Right." He leaned back slightly, not defensive, simply present. "What are the company's biggest product risks in the next 12 months?" he asked. "Staging environments, customer success bandwidth, security review cycle time? You're moving into enterprise. Those are the places I'd interrogate first." For the first time, her eyebrows lifted a millimeter. Surprise, interest, something human. Then it was gone. "We'll loop in product later." She checked the clock. 8:59. "Before we continue, are you authorized to work in the U.S. without sponsorship?" "Yes." She nodded briskly, checked a box, and the moment of humanity closed like a tab. Marcus placed his portfolio on the table and slid out a single page. A clean diagram of an enterprise rollout plan, annotated with questions. "These are notes based on your public roadmap and the Q3 keynote. Happy to walk through how I'd sequence a pilot." She didn't reach for it. Outside the glass, employees moved like currents, coffees in hand, heads bent toward screens. A product manager laughed. An engineer fist-bumped a designer with exaggerated solemnity. The office looked like all the others, and nothing like them at all. Places are never neutral. They inherit the choices of the people who run them. Ellen glanced at the door as if calculating throughput. "We'll keep this short," she said, and smiled again, thin. "This is just a preliminary conversation." Marcus understood the translation. "Prove yourself quickly. Convince me you belong here." He breathed once, slow and deep, the way he did before stepping on stage or stepping into a fire. He could feel the interview narrowing to a corridor he knew too well. Culture, the most elastic word in tech, stretched to fit whatever kept the gate. He refused to shrink. Not here, not again. All right, he said quietly and met her eyes. Let's talk about what actually matters. The clock on the conference room wall ticked past 9, its second hand slicing the quiet with steady insistence. Inside the glass walls of Newton, Marcus sat upright, his portfolio resting unopened before him, a quiet symbol of the preparation he carried. Across the table, Ellen Harper scrolled idly on her tablet, her manicured finger flicking through the pages of his resume, with the briskness of someone scanning for a reason not to linger. Her expression was neutral but taut, a mask honed through dozens of interviews a week, but Marcus had lived long enough to read the micro-flares that leaked beneath the polish. The faint tightening of her jaw when she reached the line about his tenure at a black-founded startup, the raised eyebrow when she skimmed past his MBA from Northwestern, the way her eyes darted not with curiosity, but calculation, as if she were cross-referencing him against an invisible template he couldn't see. Okay, Ellen began, her tone clipped and practiced. So, Marcus, you've clearly had some varied experience. But here at Scalar, we're laser-focused on culture fit. We're not just looking for talent. We're looking for people who vibe with us. You know what I mean? Marcus smiled faintly. Culture is important, he agreed. I'd just add that culture grows stronger with diverse perspectives. When everyone thinks the same way, blind spots multiply. Her lips pressed into a thin line. It was the kind of comment that should have sparked curiosity, but instead seemed to thud against a wall she'd already built in her mind. Well, she said lightly, with that false brightness that dressed dismissal as diplomacy, we'll see. Why don't you tell me about a time you had to work with people who didn't match your style? Marcus leaned forward slightly, folding his hands. That was every major project I've led, he replied calmly. At Interbase, half my team worked remotely across time zones, cultures, and languages. My job wasn't to make them mirror me. It was to build bridges strong enough for all of us to cross together. That's how we delivered on time and under budget. Ellen tapped her screen, not looking up. Interesting, she murmured, the word flat and perfunctory. The interview slid into a rhythm Marcus knew too well. Ellen's questions became shallow, surface level, rarely giving him the room to unfold the depth of his answers. When he brought up measurable results, platform adoption metrics, customer retention lifts, cost reductions, she glossed over them, steering instead to vague hypotheticals about hustle and energy. So, she said finally, leaning back in her chair, where do you see yourself here? Hypothetically, if you were a fit. The phrasing wasn't accidental. Marcus caught the italic emphasis in her tone, the way the word if lingered like a caution flag. He kept his voice steady. I see myself contributing where Scalar is about to grow the most. Enterprise trust. Building processes that scale, ensuring reliability, balancing innovation with stability. It's not about a title to me. It's about impact. For a moment, Ellen said nothing. Her eyes flicked once more over his resume, then back to him, cool and appraising. Okay, she said finally, her voice brisk. Well, we'll, be in touch. This is just the early stage, you understand? Marcus recognized the line. He'd heard variations on it before. The kind of closing that wasn't about next steps, but about quiet exit strategies. Of course, he replied, rising smoothly. He extended his hand again. This time her shake was quicker, even cooler, already pulling away. As she guided him back toward the reception area, Marcus caught glimpses of the office around him. A team laughing over lattes near the espresso machine, a manager enthusiastically whiteboarding ideas, an intern rushing by with sticky notes plastered up her arm. Energy buzzed in the air, the kind of kinetic optimism startups prided themselves on. Yet here he was, ushered out not because of a lack of skill or vision, but because his presence hadn't slid neatly into a narrow mold labeled fit. At the lobby doors, Ellen paused. Thanks for your time, Marcus, she said with a polite smile that carried no warmth. Thank you, Marcus replied evenly. He clipped his badge from his lapel, set it gently on the desk, and stepped back into the city's roar. Outside, the morning sun glared against glass towers, turning sidewalks into rivers of light. He adjusted his tie and inhaled deeply. The sting of dismissal was familiar, but so was the resolve it left in its wake. He had seen enough to know that sometimes rejection wasn't about merit but perception. a lens warped by bias so subtle its holders could swear it wasn't there. And yet, as Marcus walked toward the subway, his stride lengthened, steady and assured. He had no idea just how quickly the narrative at Scalar Labs would shift, or how dramatically Ellen Harper's certainty would shatter when her carefully constructed assumptions collided with truth. The interview room was empty now, its polished glass table reflecting the late morning sun, but Ellen Harper lingered for a moment, tapping her nails against her tablet. Marcus's resume still glowed faintly on the screen, but she swiped it away with a casual flick, as though erasing not just a file, but the candidate himself. "Not our type," she muttered under her breath, a whisper meant only for herself. She straightened, smoothed her blazer, and strutted out into the open-plan office, where the hum of keyboards and the low murmur of conversations filled the air. Her colleague Derek, from the engineering recruitment team, looked up from his desk as she walked by. "How'd it go?" he asked, tone polite, half distracted by the line of code glowing on his dual monitors. Ellen rolled her eyes dramatically, loud enough for the nearby desks to hear. "Let's just say, that one wasn't a culture fit," she said with a smirk. She perched on the edge of his desk, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. "You know the type. Good on paper, but just not the vibe we're looking for. Honestly, I don't know why people like that even bother applying here." Derek frowned slightly. He had some strong credentials, though, right? "I think I saw Northwestern on his resume." Ellen gave a dismissive wave, as if batting away an annoying fly. "Oh, sure, fancy school names. Everyone's got those these days. Doesn't mean he'd survive 5 minutes in our high-energy environment. He was too stiff, too serious, no spark. And let's be real, our clients expect a certain Polish." Her eyes gleamed as she said the word, letting it hang in the air like an unspoken code. Across the aisle, Rachel, another recruiter, stiffened in her chair. She didn't say anything, but her lips pressed into a thin line. She'd been in this office long enough to recognize the undercurrent in Ellen's comments, the carefully coded language that masked prejudice as professionalism. "You should have seen him," Ellen continued, her voice a little louder now, pulling in the attention of others. "When I asked about culture, he went on about diverse perspectives and building bridges." She made air quotes with her fingers, mocking the words. "That's great for a TED Talk, maybe. But here, we need hustlers, disruptors, people who live and breathe this world, not someone lecturing us about inclusivity." Derek shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping back to his screen. Rachel gave him a look but stayed silent. The unspoken tension hovered, like static before a storm. Ellen, oblivious, leaned back in her chair with a satisfied sigh. "Anyway, I wrapped it up quick. No sense wasting time. We've got a pipeline full of candidates who actually get it. You know, people who look like they belong here." The phrase slipped out casually, but it landed with weight. Rachel's knuckles tightened around her pen. She glanced at Ellen, then back at her notes, choosing silence over confrontation, for now. Meanwhile, Ellen opened Slack on her laptop and typed briskly into the recruiter's private channel. "Met with Marcus Taylor. Nice guy, but way off the mark. Not our vibe. Didn't feel like someone we could put in front of clients." She punctuated it with a shrugging emoji, as if that sealed the judgment. Responses trickled in. "Got it, thanks. Yeah, fit is everything. We'll move on then." Each reply reinforced her confidence, her conviction that she'd made the right call. Ellen smirked, satisfied, then spun her chair back toward her desk, already thinking about the next interview. What she couldn't see, what she couldn't even imagine, was how soon those words would come back to haunt her. The man she had so casually dismissed would not only return, but return with authority, standing in a position where her shallow assessments would collapse under the weight of undeniable truth. For now, though, Ellen basked in her certainty, blissfully unaware that the very candidate she mocked as unfit would soon stand beside the CEO, rewriting the narrative of Scalar Labs and unraveling her own in the process. The open-floor office of Scalar Labs buzzed with the nervous hum of anticipation. The CEO, Richard Cole, a visionary in his early 50s, with a commanding presence and an easy smile, had summoned the entire staff to the main auditorium for a special announcement. No further details had been given, and rumors rippled like wildfire through the company Slack channels. New funding round? A merger? Someone big joining the board? By mid-morning, rows of employees filed into the gleaming space, a polished amphitheater lined with wood paneling and a panoramic view of the city skyline. Laptops clicked shut, cappuccinos were hastily set aside, and conversations swelled into a low roar. At the center stage stood a sleek podium bearing the Scalar Labs logo, a spotlight overhead throwing it into sharp relief. Ellen Harper slid into a seat toward the front, smoothing the wrinkles in her blazer. She loved events like these, moments where she could be visible, close to leadership, part of the inner circle. She glanced around, noting where the directors and managers were seated, calculating whose approval she might catch with a well-timed nod or enthusiastic clap. Richard Cole finally entered, his presence commanding immediate silence. He wore no tie, just a tailored navy suit that spoke of quiet confidence. Behind him, a large screen flickered to life with the Scalar Labs insignia. "Good morning, everyone," Richard began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "First, let me say how proud I am of what this team has accomplished in such a short time. Scalar has grown faster than any of us could have predicted, and with growth comes the responsibility to make the right choices: strategic, cultural, and human." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd at that last word. Ellen straightened in her chair, smiling to herself. Culture fit, she thought smugly. She prided herself on being a gatekeeper of that very thing. Richard continued, pacing slowly across the stage. "As we expand into new markets, one of our top priorities must be trust. Building relationships that last, not just with our clients, but with the people behind the code, the partnerships, and the innovation. To guide us in that mission, I've invited someone to join me at the helm. A person I trust implicitly. Someone who understands not just where we are, but where we must go." The employees leaned forward, whispers rustling like leaves in a breeze. Ellen's pulse quickened. Her recruiter's mind was already racing. Who did he hire? A Silicon Valley hotshot? A Wall Street veteran? Some ex-Google VP? Richard paused at center stage, letting the tension build. Then, he turned toward the wings of the auditorium and gestured with open arms. "Please welcome," he declared, his voice booming with pride, "our new senior strategic advisor, Marcus Taylor." For a heartbeat, silence fell. And then, like the sharp intake of air before a gasp, the room erupted. Marcus stepped onto the stage with measured calm, the same composure he had carried into Ellen's interview room days before. But here in the spotlight, he was transformed. The morning sun pouring through the windows seemed to crown him in light as he strode confidently across the stage in a crisp charcoal suit, his presence radiating quiet authority. Richard clasped his hand warmly and clapped him on the shoulder. "Marcus isn't just an advisor," Richard said to the room. "He's a longtime collaborator, a strategist who's helped companies scale responsibly, sustainably, and inclusively. He's worked at the highest levels, and more importantly, he's someone whose insight I personally rely on." The applause swelled, genuine and thunderous, echoing off the glass walls. People nodded, smiled, even rose to their feet. A handful of employees exchanged glances of recognition. Some had read Marcus's published work on enterprise growth. Others had seen him speak at conferences. In the second row, Ellen froze. Her hands, mid-clap, faltered awkwardly. Her face flushed hot, then cold. Marcus. Marcus Taylor. The name pounded in her head. Her mind shot back to the interview room, the dismissive tone she'd taken, the smirk she'd worn when mocking him afterward. And now here he was, standing beside the CEO himself. She felt her stomach tighten as Richard went on. "Marcus is here not just to advise me, but to help shape the very DNA of Scalar Labs. He believes in innovation rooted in integrity, in building a culture where every voice has value. That's the kind of leadership I want by my side." Ellen swallowed hard. The words stung like a direct rebuke, though no one in the room knew the history between her and Marcus. She forced her hands together in a hollow clap, praying no one noticed how stiff and artificial her smile had become. Marcus stepped forward, adjusting the microphone. His gaze swept over the audience, calm yet piercing, before landing, just for a moment, on Ellen. There was no malice in his expression, only quiet recognition, a flicker of acknowledgement that said, "I remember you. I remember how you saw me. And now, here we are." The crowd leaned in as Marcus began to speak, his voice steady and warm. "Thank you, Richard. And thank you, everyone, for this welcome. Scalar's mission excites me because it's about building, not just technology, but trust. My journey has taught me that true innovation happens when you bring different voices together, not when you exclude them. My role here is simple: to help us grow stronger by growing wiser, together." The auditorium roared with approval. Ellen, however, could barely hear the applause over the pounding in her ears. She had dismissed Marcus as not our vibe. Now he stood on stage as the CEO's most trusted advisor, shaping the very culture she claimed to guard. And this was only the beginning. The applause from the grand reveal still echoed in Ellen's mind hours later. Back at her desk, she sat stiffly, her hands unmoving on her keyboard. Colleagues nearby whispered animatedly about Marcus's speech, trading impressions with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for celebrities or tech visionaries. "Did you hear him talk about trust?" one engineer gushed. "Finally, someone here who gets it. Not just code and speed, but people." "Yeah," another chimed in. "Richard clearly respects him. You could see it." Ellen's jaw tightened. She forced a polite smile when someone tried to loop her into the conversation, but her stomach was knotted. Every sentence praising Marcus felt like a reminder of her mistake, as if the whole company were holding up a mirror she wanted to smash. Meanwhile, upstairs on the top floor, Marcus Taylor stepped into Richard Cole's private office. The room was spacious yet uncluttered, its floor-to-ceiling windows flooding the space with golden afternoon light. A minimalist desk, a leather sofa, and a handful of framed photographs of Richard with global leaders adorned the room. Richard rose from behind the desk, clasping Marcus's hand firmly. "You killed it today," he said warmly. "The team already loves you. And honestly, I've never seen them that engaged during an announcement." Marcus smiled modestly. "I appreciate it, Richard. But this is just the beginning. Winning a room for 10 minutes is easy. Building a culture that lasts, that's the real work." Richard gestured toward the sofa, and they both sat down. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Let's get right to it. I brought you here because Scalar is growing fast. Too fast, maybe. We're onboarding clients, scaling tech, hiring like crazy. But something's off. You saw it in the way Ellen, what's her name, Harper, handled your interview. That wasn't a one-off. There are cracks in our culture." Marcus nodded, his expression calm but thoughtful. "I noticed. She treated me as though I didn't belong before I'd spoken a word. That's not just about me. That's about the lens through which she views candidates. And if she's a gatekeeper here, Scalar is shutting out talent it desperately needs." Richard exhaled sharply, as if Marcus had put into words the unease he'd been carrying. "Exactly. I want to fix this. But I'll be honest, I don't know how to. Most of our recruiters pride themselves on their gut instincts. They call it culture fit." Marcus leaned back, his voice steady and deliberate. "Culture fit is just another word for comfort. It means hiring people who look, sound, and think like you. It feels safe, but it kills innovation. What you need isn't culture fit, it's culture add. You need people who challenge assumptions, who make the room smarter, simply by being in it." Richard's eyes brightened. "That's good. Culture addition. So how do we make that shift?" Marcus's words carried the cadence of someone who had thought deeply about this for years. First, transparency. Recruitment can't happen behind closed doors, with decisions justified by vague terms like vibe or fit. Every candidate deserves measurable evaluation criteria: skills, potential, adaptability. Second, accountability. If someone rejects a candidate, they must back it up with more than gut feelings. And third, leadership by example. If you, Richard, Show that you value diverse perspectives, others will follow. Richard scribbled furiously in a leather-bound notebook, nodding at each point. This is exactly why I wanted you here. You're giving me language for problems I've sensed but couldn't define. Marcus allowed a brief smile. Language matters. It shapes action. But beyond policy, you need stories. People here must see the value of what you're describing, not just read it in a handbook. Richard leaned back, tapping his pen against his chin. And you've already given them that story today. They saw you on stage, standing with me. That image will stay with them. It was powerful. Marcus's gaze softened. I didn't stand there to make a point about me, Richard. I stood there to show that someone like me belongs here, belongs anywhere decisions are made. If even one junior engineer or intern in that room saw themselves in me, then today mattered. A heavy silence followed, filled not with tension but with understanding. Richard's eyes gleamed with respect. You're right. That's bigger than this company. That's leadership. Meanwhile, downstairs, Ellen sat at her desk in turmoil. She replayed every moment of Marcus's interview in her mind. The way she had smiled smugly, the way she'd written, "Not our vibe" in Slack, the laughter of colleagues who had agreed with her. Shame pressed against her chest, but another emotion gnawed just as fiercely. Fear. She had dismissed Marcus, and now he wasn't just inside the company. He was advising the CEO himself. Her authority, her reputation, even her job could be on the line. When Marcus left Richard's office later that day, he carried with him not only a set of strategies, but also a quiet conviction. He had been dismissed, underestimated, written off, and yet here he was, shaping the very policies that would dismantle the biases Ellen had embodied. For Marcus, it wasn't revenge, it was purpose. For Ellen, however, it was the beginning of a reckoning she could no longer avoid. The morning after Marcus's first strategy session with Richard, the atmosphere at Scalar Labs seemed charged with a subtle but undeniable shift. Conversations that might once have revolved around sprint deadlines and client calls were now peppered with enthusiastic references to Marcus's vision, culture ad, and transparency in hiring. His presence had ignited a spark that spread quickly through the office. But for Ellen Harper, that spark felt less like inspiration and more like a wildfire threatening to consume her. Ellen's unease. Ellen sat rigidly at her desk, staring at her monitor, but not really seeing the screen. She had drafted an email 3 times already, an innocuous team update on recruitment, but deleted it each time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as her mind replayed the CEO's announcement. Marcus, standing tall under the spotlight. Marcus greeted with applause that felt like thunder. Marcus looking directly at her with that calm, piercing recognition. Her cheeks flushed at the memory. The thought that he might reveal how she had treated him filled her with dread. What if he tells Richard? What if he already has? Worse still, she couldn't shake the image of her own Slack message. Not our vibe. She had typed it with such smug certainty, even attaching a laughing emoji. That thread was still in the system, buried somewhere in the company's internal chat logs. If it ever resurfaced, it would be the end of her. I need to get ahead of this, she thought desperately. I need to control the story before he does. The first signs. Later that morning, Ellen sat in on a recruiting team meeting. The agenda was simple, candidate pipeline updates. But the conversation kept veering toward Marcus. Did you guys hear about the new evaluation framework Marcus is suggesting? One recruiter said, scrolling through her notes. Structured rubrics for every role. No more gut feel rejections. Another recruiter nodded eagerly. Yeah, and he's talking about mentorship pipelines for non-traditional candidates. Honestly, it sounds like a game changer. Ellen's stomach tightened. She forced a laugh that came out brittle. Well, let's not get carried away. These things sound nice in theory, but they can slow down the process. We don't want to drown in paperwork just because someone thinks it makes us look progressive. The room fell silent for a beat, the recruiters exchanging wary glances. Normally, Ellen's voice carried authority, but now it sounded defensive, even sour. Someone cleared their throat and quickly moved the conversation back to logistics. Ellen noticed it, the subtle shift in body language. The recruiters weren't rallying behind her the way they once did. Marcus's influence was already reshaping loyalties. Ellen's schemes. That afternoon, Ellen slipped into an empty meeting room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She dialed the number of Dana Lewis, the director of operations, a woman known for her skepticism towards soft initiatives. "Dana, it's Ellen," she began, lowering her voice. "Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up. This new advisor Richard brought in, Marcus Taylor, he's pushing some pretty radical changes to how we hire. Honestly, I'm worried it's going to bog us down." There was a pause on the line, then Dana's cautious reply. "Richard seems pretty enthusiastic about him." Ellen pressed harder. "Of course he is. Richard loves his shiny new ideas, but we're the ones who'll have to deal with the fallout. You know how it goes. Endless paperwork, slowed hiring cycles, and candidates who just don't fit with Scalar's culture." She caught herself, realizing too late that the word echoed Marcus's critique of culture fit. She scrambled to recover. "I mean, with our fast-paced environment." Dana didn't respond right away, and Ellen sensed she wasn't winning her over. "Well, I'll keep an eye on it," Dana said finally. "Let's see how it plays out." The line went dead, leaving Ellen with a hollow pit in her stomach. She had expected Dana to align with her instantly, to validate her doubts. Instead, she felt the first crack in her network of allies. Marcus in action. At the same time Ellen was scrambling, Marcus was moving through the office with quiet purpose. He met with department heads, asking probing questions about their pain points. He joined engineers for lunch, listening more than he spoke. He even sat with junior staff in the break room, drawing out ideas from those who usually went unheard. His approach wasn't flashy, but it was magnetic. People felt seen, respected. Within days, he had cultivated trust in ways Ellen had never managed, despite years at the company. Word spread quickly. Marcus was different. He wasn't just another advisor, parachuting in with a slide deck and buzzwords. He cared. Ellen's breaking point. By the end of the week, Ellen's anxiety was eating her alive. Every smile Marcus exchanged with her coworkers felt like another thread unraveling in her carefully woven image of authority. She avoided eye contact with him in the hallways, terrified he might stop her, might expose her. But the silence was almost worse. Marcus never mentioned their interview. He never brought up her rejection. He didn't need to. The contrast between who she had claimed he was, not our vibe, and who he truly was became more obvious with each passing day. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Ellen sat alone at her desk, staring at the glow of her monitor. The Slack window was open, the search bar blinking. With trembling fingers, she typed, "Marcus Taylor interview." There it was, the thread. Her message, flippant and cruel. The laughing emoji. A handful of others chiming in with casual agreement. She deleted it in a panic, her hands shaking. But the damage was already done. Messages could be archived, but they could also be retrieved. And in that moment, Ellen realized something chilling. It wasn't Marcus who would destroy her. It was her own words. A gathering storm. That night, as Ellen packed up to leave, she caught sight of Marcus through the glass walls of a conference room. He stood with Richard, pointing at a whiteboard filled with diagrams. Richard was laughing, nodding, clearly energized. Ellen froze, her bag hanging limply at her side. The image seared itself into her mind. Marcus shaping the future of Scalar, his voice carrying weight at the highest levels. For the first time, Ellen felt the walls closing in. Her influence was slipping away, and no amount of scheming seemed enough to stop it. She left the office with a single thought echoing in her mind. If I don't do something drastic, I'll be erased. The day of Scalar Lab's quarterly all-hands arrived with a buzz of anticipation that could be felt the moment employees streamed through the glass doors of the headquarters. The event was usually a chance for the CEO to highlight wins, announce new initiatives, and reaffirm the company's culture. But this time, the air carried a sharper edge. Everyone knew things had been shifting in recent weeks. Marcus's presence had rippled through every department, raising questions about the future, about what would be prioritized, and about who would lead the next chapter of the company's growth. By noon, the atrium was filled with rows of chairs, a makeshift stage, and a large screen displaying the company's logo. Employees settled in, murmuring about upcoming product launches, performance metrics, and whispers of the new framework Marcus had been championing. Ellen sat near the front, her posture stiff, her smile rehearsed. She had chosen her outfit carefully: sharp navy blazer, pearl earrings, not a hair out of place, as though control over her appearance could mask the unraveling she felt inside. Richard stepped onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. He delivered his usual updates with polished charisma: record profits, expanded partnerships, new clients. But then his tone shifted and the room hushed in expectation. "There's something more important I want to talk about today," he said, his voice steady, resonant. "Our future isn't just about numbers. It's about people, about who we bring into this company and the values we uphold." Ellen's stomach tightened. She knew what was coming. Richard gestured toward the side of the stage. "You've all met him by now, but today, I want to formally introduce Marcus Taylor, not just as an advisor, but as a key partner in shaping the culture of Scalar Labs. Marcus has been working closely with me, and the work he's already started will define the next era of this company." Applause filled the room as Marcus walked out, his presence commanding without being ostentatious. He wore a dark suit, simple but elegant, and as he stood beside Richard, his calm confidence radiated. Ellen clapped too, though her palms felt cold, her heart racing. Marcus began to speak, his voice clear and measured. He didn't boast, didn't grandstand. Instead, he told a story. He spoke of his own journey in tech, of the barriers he'd faced, of moments when his qualifications were questioned before he had even spoken a word. His eyes scanned the audience as he said, "Bias, conscious or unconscious, costs companies more than they realize. It isn't just about missing out on good people. It's about eroding trust, about teaching employees that fairness is negotiable, and that's not a culture where innovation thrives." The room was silent, every face attentive. Ellen shifted uncomfortably, praying no one remembered the dismissive words she'd spoken just weeks ago. But as Marcus continued, it became clear that many already did. His story wasn't hypothetical. It was lived. And some in that room had witnessed her arrogance firsthand. Richard stepped forward again. "To make sure our values are more than just words, Marcus will be leading a new initiative on inclusive hiring and employee development. Structured rubrics, mentorship pathways, accountability in how we recruit and promote. It's all starting now. This is non-negotiable. It's who we are going to be." The applause this time was thunderous, erupting into cheers. Employees stood, clapping, nodding, some even whistling in excitement. Ellen clapped too, but her hands trembled, and she felt the sting of eyes flicking toward her. Rachel, the recruiter who had once sat silently as Ellen mocked Marcus, was now applauding with fierce energy, her gaze fixed on the stage, as if vindication had finally arrived. Then, as if the universe itself demanded closure, Richard turned directly toward Ellen. His words were calm, but carried the weight of finality. "And let this be a lesson for all of us," he said, addressing the entire room. "Our measure of talent must never again be reduced to surface judgments or shallow notions of fit. Talent, integrity, and vision come in many forms. When we dismiss people unfairly, we don't just hurt them, we hurt ourselves." The audience murmured, understanding exactly what was being said, without Marcus or Richard ever needing to mention her name. Ellen's cheeks burned crimson. She forced herself to keep smiling, though it felt like glass shattering inside her chest. Marcus didn't look at her with malice. Instead, his gaze was steady, compassionate even, as if he wanted her to understand the deeper truth. This wasn't about revenge. It was about growth, about showing that no prejudice, no dismissal, no cruel words could bury talent forever. When the meeting ended, employees rushed toward Marcus, eager to shake his hand, share their support, or simply thank him. Ellen remained in her seat, frozen, watching as the man she had once dismissed as "not our vibe" became the embodiment of Scalar's future. The sound of applause and laughter filled the atrium. But for Ellen, it was muffled, like she was underwater. She knew, with a clarity that cut deep, Her influence was gone. Her words, her biases, her old way of doing things, they had no place in this new chapter. Marcus had not only risen above her dismissal, he had rewritten the narrative of the company itself. And as she stood and quietly slipped out of the room, Ellen realized that the legacy she had built was no longer one of power or authority. It was a cautionary tale, overshadowed by the triumph of the man she had once tried to erase. Would you like me to also draft a cinematic-style image prompt for this final chapter? Like Marcus standing on stage next to the CEO, the audience clapping, Ellen shrinking in her chair, so you can generate a realistic illustration for it?